to another episode of Tell Muses. This is season 2 of Tell Muses, which is a podcast run by storytellers, with storytellers, for storytellers, and for anyone interested in the art of the oral world. So, this season, our second season of our podcast, is under the wing of Gawi, aka Get a Word in Edgeways, which is a lovely little festival taking place every October in the very beautiful, very picturesque little town of Muchwenlock, which nobody knows, but I am trying to spread the word. It is a border town right next to the Welsh border, but on the English side. So the first time I went there, I thought I was beamed back to Shakespearean times. You have the wooden
Wooden beams.
beams, of course, wooden beams outside the windows, like you picture it in your head. And every year, I think it's getting better and warmer. It's still small scale, very friendly, very cozy festival. But you get to see new faces every year. You get to see friends, meet friends and make new ones. So I highly recommend people should give it a try, especially if they are in the close vicinity of Muchwenlock. Even if not, it is worth it, in my humble opinion. So today, in this episode, we have with us all the way from the US our lovely colleague Jay Leeming. Hello, Jay, and welcome.
Hello, Despina. Good to be here. Great to be here. Hello, Simona and Despina.
Thank you for being here.
So, Jay, normally we begin these interviews asking our muses to tell us a few things about themselves. So, would you like to tell the people who will listen to this who Jay Leeming is?
Well, gosh. Jay Leeming is what I'm called, but who am I? I don't know. That's a big question. I'm a storyteller. I live in upstate New York in the U.S., in the town of Ithaca, named for the Greek island, in fact. And I tell stories. So I'm also a musician and a poet, and I've done that for some time now. Yeah, that's my story.
Jay, how did you get into storytelling? And in particular, in your case, how did you get into Greek mythology and the Iliad, the Odyssey? And now that I hear that you live in Ithaca, did you get into storytelling because you were living in Ithaca, or did you go live in Ithaca later on in your life?
Hmm. Let's see. Well, there's 15 answers to those questions, like 15 feathers of a bird. Many people, I told stories as a child. I was very much excited by imagination. When I say told, I mean I wrote stories. I lived in story, as children do. Later on, I worked as a ranger naturalist in Yosemite National Park in California. I was up there in the high mountains, and it was beautiful, huge trees, wilderness all around us. But nobody there was telling stories. There were rangers telling scientific stories and telling historical stories, which is all great, of course. But nobody was telling mythic type stories. And we were there with the darkness and the fire crackling up. Story is a beautiful way to connect with nature and with the land. It just seemed like a job somebody should do. And I looked around and nobody else really could. So I took it on. And I had been around storytellers before as a poet, and just in my life, I had been lucky enough to hear storytellers telling stories to adults, bigger stories, fairy tales, but also myths. And so I started telling two stories. I told the wedding of Dame Ragnell and Sir Gawain, the Arthurian story, and I told the story of Orpheus descending to the underworld. It was wonderful, of course, there because you could stand at night in the dark and tell people about the stars. And the stars there, it's very high up elevation, so the stars are crystal clear. And I could tell the story of Orpheus and then say, and Zeus put his lyre in the sky, and there it is, and you could point, and there it is, sparkling above us. So that was the beginning of me telling stories to adults. And at a certain point, I realized it was a thing that someone could do in this world, and started following that as intensely as I could. As for Ithaca, that's just the fates laughing at me or us in some way. And by the way, you happen to live in Ithaca. Yeah, it's not a town of mythic bardic storytellers. It's a town like many others, but it just happens to be called Ithaca, yes.
Well, the actual Ithaca was not a town of mythic storytellers or bards. It was other places that sang Ithaca's songs, really. But I do know that you don't focus only on Greek myths. You have tried out different kinds of mythologies from different cultures, right, Jay?
Yes, like a lot of storytellers, I began with fairy tales, European fairy tales mostly, because I sort of knew them and the vocabulary of their images was familiar to me, forests, witches, all that stuff. And then I sought something larger and I started telling Gilgamesh, the epic from ancient Mesopotamia, and I started telling the Proteus story from the Odyssey when Menelaus is stuck off the coast of Egypt and meets Proteus, the changing man. So I guess a big part of what I do is a desire to be connected in the deepest way possible to big stories and epic stories and myths. There's a spiritual content to them often, and they're really large, and so I like that. Because as I get older, life seems bigger. You live many lives in this world. When you're a teenager, it's one kind of life, and then your 20s, it's something else, and lo and behold, you get married, have kids. Life seems epic. So that has drawn me to the Odyssey first, and then the Iliad, and then the Mahabharata from India, which I quite love. Growing up, I had to read part of the Odyssey in school. That's the story Americans know best, generally, of the epic stories. But still, it wasn't a golden moment where a light went on. I was like, oh, that's it. I was kind of like, that's cool. But, Star Wars is cooler, so, so then, it took years of me getting to know that story and to feel the depths in it, to love it the way I do now.
I don't know if your brain works like mine, but I might happen to read a story and say, it's okay, and then have an actual teller tell the story in front of my eyes, and then suddenly it manifests, it takes flesh. So it might have been
Yes.
that.
Yes, absolutely. I've had that happen as well. And I've also had the reverse where somebody tells a story and it's amazing and I'm like, wow. And then I go look at it in the book and it's kind of like, it's okay. I mean, the stories, they are in the books, but they're in the books, as you both know. They're sort of like butterflies in a museum behind glass, or something. They're preserved, but they don't really live. And so yes, I think it was perhaps that way. The Odyssey on paper is different from the Odyssey as a lived experience.
About that, the Odyssey and the Iliad, for example, are poetry in the written form. It's poetry, so there are certain words put in a certain way. How does it work when you tell these stories? How do you interpret them? Do you just tell the story without thinking about the original text? Do you weave some sentences from the original text into your telling? How do you go about it?
That's a good question. As storytellers do with many stories, whatever kind of story it is, I tell the story in my own words. That's for sure. But in the case of the Odyssey and the Iliad, you have these words of Homer, whoever that was, and they are quite beautiful words, even in translation. In English, you can read numerous translations, and it's sort of like you get different ways to say something, because people are attempting to preserve that beauty in English, and so they try many different ways. So I'm definitely influenced by everything I've read. I try to use a literal translation as much as possible so I can really get to what the Greek is saying. But I have developed my own certain phrases I probably do repeat each time. I don't think there's much that's directly from the original, but there are some things for sure. So it's a mix of things I've taken straight from what we call the original, even though there's really no such thing in some sense, and my own language each time. Yeah, is that reasonably clear?
Absolutely, yes.
Homer is such a wonderful teacher, I've found. There's scenes in the Iliad that recently I was telling the death of Hector, and I told it a certain way. He dies, and his parents and his wife see that, and they freak out. They grieve, and they sorrow. But then I said, oh, I think I'm missing something. And I looked at Homer, and Homer is so wonderful in the way he or she composes the story. In Homer, as you probably know, Hector dies and he's killed by Achilles, and his parents see him on the wall, Priam and Hecuba, and then his wife is inside, and she's just asked the servants to prepare a bath for him, and she's weaving, and she hears the sound of the grief outside, and she drops the shuttle of her loom. So details like that are fantastic, and so I learn from those and use them in my performances.
We've lost touch of what it actually used to be in the ancient world. We do have some pictures or some depictions on vases and pottery and the like, so we can only guess. But most probably, the thing they would keep would be the meter. Like you have the iambic meter, so different kinds of poetic meters. That means rhythms that bards could follow. So the epic, being so long, would be turned into a song so that it would help, like a memory trick, like a technique. And I know this today because I know there are still people in the Balkans above Greece, above today's borders, who actually do the same with their epics. And you can have people recite an infinite number of verses, and you just wonder how do they remember, right? This is where it's put into song. This is
Mm.
one technique. And then they wouldn't care about rhyme. They wouldn't care about rhyme. The only thing that would count would be meter, the rhythm. So I know you said earlier, and I've seen you play the guitar beautifully. Do you combine the guitar with your telling?
Yes, and I'm very inspired by the types of performers you mentioned in the Balkans. I mean, I find that just wonderful and fascinating. As for me, yeah, I combine the guitar and I also use a drum, and they're both very helpful. Sometimes I use them to divide the story. If some big event has just happened and the audience needs to take it in, I might play the guitar or the drum even. But I also use them to accompany. Well, they're both good for that. And it's wonderful because it slows my words down because the audience has something else to listen to, the guitar, the drum. And I can take a breath and remember what happens next and remember what to say, and invent what to say. So, yeah, I try to use them both. They're both good for transitions and for traveling as well. When characters are sailing or on horseback, both the drum and the guitar are very helpful for that.
And do you usually or mainly tell these big epics in one go, several sittings, or just episodes of the epics?
Well, that's the trick. You have to find a way to fit it into modern life, and I would love it. I'd love to tell any of these all night. That would be great. If you have a situation where somebody needs an all night storyteller, let me know. But no, usually I tell them in smaller doses. I started telling the Odyssey during the pandemic, the COVID pandemic, and I told a little piece of it each night online. And that worked pretty well. Of course, being in person is much better than being online for story, but nevertheless, it gave everybody a little bit of the story each day. I've done the same here in Ithaca at a local theater. More often, I do like 3 weekends, 3 Saturdays in a row. Right now, I'm doing the Iliad in 3 sections on 3 separate Thursdays. But I say the Iliad, it's really just part of the Iliad. You have to be clever and strategic about selecting parts of the story which people know and can take in a single night. Will also connect to the others. So.
And then it's research, of course, because it's not just the one written text, but there are so many stories within the stories within the stories in an endless loop that just goes further and further back in the past. Do you carry on telling folk tales as well?
Fairy tales for sure. I mean, I definitely tell fairy tales in schools and things like that. So yes, I tell folk tales too. Probably fewer of those than the others. Of course, it gets easier to slip them into everyday life. Folk tales are easy to just kind of walk right into with many audiences. There's no preparation. You don't have to explain who Zeus and Ares and Athena and Aphrodite are. Most people know. So yes, I tell folk tales and fairy tales as well.
And is any one of them popping into your head right now as we speak and would desperately like to come out?
Ah, the fairy tales are all a bit long, the most of the ones I know. I like the Russian tales, Elena the Wise, Maria Morevna. Sleeping Beauty, I like a lot. That's a beautiful story. I didn't like it for a long time, and then I started telling it, and it sort of awoke for me, and I was like, wow, that's a really good story. I'd be happy to share something. So here's a story for you. And we will just plunge into it. And may this story visit us here, as stories like to do, and be happy amongst us here. Well, once the god Zeus fell in love. And the goddess he fell in love with was named Metis. And she could change herself into anything she wanted to be. So she taught this to Zeus. So she taught this knowledge to Zeus. Metis did. Because she could transform herself into anything she wanted to be, and so he could do the same. And so they would spend time together on Olympus as god and goddess. But they would also run off together and perhaps take the shape of two deer in a field, or two wolves, or perhaps two birds singing together in a tree, or two snakes wrapping themselves around each other, enjoying the delicious dry infinity of their skin sliding across each other. And then they would return to Olympus as god and goddess. Well, this went on for some time. But the thing is, Zeus had a wandering eye, and one day there in Olympus he saw another goddess who he also liked, and her name was Hera. He saw her beside a pool of water, and he loved how the fire in her eyes and the deep calm of the water met and were one thing, it seemed. She seemed to embrace all things as if she were already the queen of heaven and earth. And he smiled at her, but she looked at him and she scowled and walked away. Well, later that day, Zeus spent some time with Metis. But this time things were a little different. She became a bird, and he became a turtle. And she became a lion, and he became a snake. And she became a butterfly, and he became a bear. And then she became a cockroach, and he became a spider. And then she became a fly, and he turned into a frog. And his tongue zipped out of his mouth, took hold of her, seized her, and snapped her up into his belly. And she was gone. Well, then Zeus turned himself into a sparrow, and he flew away from where they had met towards Olympus. But on the way, rain began to fall, so that Zeus took shelter in a garden of Olympus, still as a sparrow. He took shelter beneath a large tree. And there was someone else beneath that tree, and it was Hera. And the rain was falling down. She was waiting beneath this tree, and she saw the sparrow. Ah, the poor little sparrow. She picked up the sparrow, bedraggled with rainwater in its feathers. Ah, my dear sparrow, she said. But a moment later, That sparrow was a cat, and then a lion, and then Zeus himself. And now she was no longer holding him, but being held. And she cried out, but he kissed her, and then he held her, and after a while it was hard to say whether her cries were of delight or of pain. And when that rainstorm ended, the two of them returned to Olympus as god and goddess. And some time later they were married as the king and queen of all the universe. And there was a large celebration, and all was well, and it seemed like perhaps this story could end here. But the thing is, one day in Olympus, Zeus heard a sound, a tapping sound. Tap, 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 tap. He wondered what it was. Was Hephaestus building something? No, didn't seem so. He listened, he heard it again. Tap, 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 tap. Apollo was there. Do you hear that? No, I don't hear that. And he did not hear. It got louder and louder. Tap, 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 bang, bang, bang. Only Zeus seemed to hear it. And what had happened was this. When he had swallowed Metis, this changeable, beautiful goddess, she had not died. She was a goddess after all. She was quite powerful. She had transformed herself, and now she was living inside Zeus's head. And not only this, but she was pregnant with a child, expecting a daughter. And she thought that her daughter would need some things when she was born. So she was up there inside Zeus's head, using his head, his skull, for her workshop. She was making a golden helmet for her daughter, tapping away, tap, 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 tap. And so Zeus heard this, and it was painful and disturbing. Oh, my head, he said, bang, 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 all day long. And Zeus began to stagger around Olympus, holding his head this way and that, and down on earth. Well, the mood of the cloud gatherer Zeus was changed and affected the world. So there were strange things in the world. There were tornadoes in the jungle, and snow was falling in the desert, and wind was blowing across the sea. Ships were getting blown this way and that. Oh, and Zeus was up on Olympus going, oh, my head, oh, my head. And then, all of a sudden, the sound stopped. It was over. No more tapping. And inside Zeus's head, Metis was there, and she had a beautiful golden helmet for her daughter. Ah, that's a good helmet, she said. That's just what she needs. And down on earth, the seas became calm, and there were no strange storms blowing through the world. But inside Zeus's head, Metis thought for a second, and she said, well, my daughter has a beautiful helmet, yes, but maybe she needs something else. I know, she needs a beautiful golden breastplate. Aha! And she began to work once more. Tap, 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 bang, bang, bang. Oh, no, and Zeus heard this. Oh, my head hurts. Down on earth, storms again. Cows getting blown out of fields. Hats being blown off people's heads. Strange turmoil of all kinds down in the world. Blue and red lightning. Oh, my gosh. Oh, my head. And so, up there on Olympus, Hermes was there, and he said, fetch Hephaestus, get him up here. And so they sent a messenger, and Hephaestus, the blacksmith god, came. And Hermes looked at him and said, open his head. What? What do you mean, open his... Yeah, open his head, now, do it. And Zeus was staggering around, and Hephaestus took his hammer, and he wound up 3 times. Shoo, shoo, shoo. And then the 3rd time, wham! He hit Zeus right on the square on the head, bang, and a big crack opened up in his head, and out leapt a goddess, Athena, and she floated in the air, glowing with a golden breastplate, and a helmet as well, and a sword, and she banged that sword against her chest, ba-da! And all of the thrones in Olympus rang with that sound. And she descended to the ground, and she said, I am Athena, goddess of wisdom and power, I offer you the world. And around her everyone looked amazed. Wow. And there was an empty throne there, as if it had always been there, as if they'd been awaiting her. The fates perhaps had expected her arrival, and she sat in that chair. And Zeus's head knit itself up again. He was a god after all. It seemed like he was okay. No more tapping happened, no more tapping. And so all the gods and the goddesses accepted Athena, gray-eyed Athena, as one of them, and she was welcome there on Olympus. And from that day forward, well, no one talked about this strange event that had happened. But now and then, when the gods were in council, when they were deciding something, Zeus would say some words which were highly unusual for Zeus. a strange sort of buzzing sound. A thought would come out of his mouth. It was unusual, as if it was a fly scribbling its pattern in the air. And they would look at each other, and they'd look at Zeus, and they'd say, "Do you think?" And "I wonder if." But nobody said anything to him because he was, after all, the king of the gods.
Oh, Jay, that was lovely.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank you for listening.
you. I do tell that myth as well. I like Athena.
Yeah. What do you like about that myth best?
Let's see. Well, I start the story a bit earlier when Metis is the one who helps him get rid of his father and make him puke out the siblings that have been consumed. Yeah, that's it. The grandfather was castrated and the father had to puke out the siblings. So I
Mm-hmm.
start with that, how they met, right? She
Mm-hmm.
has always been by his side, helping him out with her wisdom ever since he was a young lad.
Mm-hmm.
I love the part with the transformations, and we find this pattern in so many folk tales.
Mm-hmm.
Hmm. Usually, it's some kind of evil wizard chasing after the hero when they both change forms. But this particular thing here in this story, which is a love game, obviously, I haven't found it in any other tale.
Mm. It seems like one of the things that humans have to do is not change. Like the gods can change more than us, right? Which is interesting, you know. I mean, we change too, but they do it a lot, perhaps.
And why is that one of your favorite ones then?
I like the transformations. I also like the relationship between the masculine and the feminine in this story. And the idea that Zeus might have a feminine voice inside him is quite interesting. And that he's sort of king of the universe, but that in fact it's not that simple. And he has been outwitted by the goddess Metis in a way. And it's humorous and messy. Too often we see, speaking for myself and speaking perhaps for folks in America, Greece seems far away and elegant and beautiful and strong, but distant and very classical, we would say, serious and far away. And it is that, but it also can be quite ridiculous and almost silly. And this story approaches that just in the way they crack open his head and all that, you know. So.
In the version I had created, I had used different fragments from different versions, obviously, like we always do.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not that he gets infatuated with Hera, and that's why he wants to get rid of the first wife. But I'm sure this is a very nice way to go through it in the audience because many people can relate to that.
Mm.
However, right, in the version I put together, he gets this oracle that if Metis, such a wise goddess, such a wise titaness, gives him an heir, well, a male heir would be what gods would be most scared of, because they do not know beforehand whether it's going to be a son or a daughter. So if Metis gives a male heir, that heir, with Medis's wisdom and Zeus's power combined, would be more powerful than the father, which means, a hazard, a danger that needs to be eliminated. And this is what makes him swallow the fly.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's very nice.
The stories are so old and they
Mm.
have been told by so many mouths and so many Homers, I think.
Mm.
Right?
Absolutely. They're more like rivers than they are like stones. They're always kind of flowing and changing.
Does Metis ever get out?
Oh,
No.
I don't believe
Oh,
so.
poor.
There's
But
not
who
another
knows?
myth with her release. I have her lose herself and disappear or dissolve in Zeus's interior infinity.
Hmm.
A very scary, chaotic picture out of that.
Nice. I was hoping she
Well,
would get out, but
Simone, you can always make up your own version. So, my question to you, Jay, is how is the scene over there, the storytelling scene, I mean, in your part of the woods?
Let's see. America's a large place geographically. So my neck of the woods, right now, Americans are very much into personal stories, stories taken from their own lives and
Mhm.
sharing them in an artful way. So most storytelling in the US is either of that kind or it is fairy tales for children because you can get paid at a school to tell fairy tales, which is something I do as well. Generally speaking, the audience for adult storytelling of a more wondrous and mythic nature is much smaller. But like I say, I'm generalizing. I mean, it's a big place, and those same forces are happening other places in Europe as well, I think. Um, but I think Americans, the personal stories. I mean, you probably have some of that over there, but it's a sense of like, who are we? I mean, you look at Americans; they come across the sea and they threw everything away, or their ancestors did, or it was forcibly taken from them, and so your own story has a new power, perhaps. So that's popular. But for me, I like the magic, I like the wonder, and I like the sacred content, even if it's sort of muted and quiet. I like the spiritual angle on a lot of these stories as well.
I know that recently you've also been to Greece, and I was wondering how is it to tell these tales in Greece, in their setting? What kind of experience was it for you?
That's a good question. I was lucky enough to go to Cyprus and to Greece the end of last year. And I told stories in Cyprus and in Thessaloniki and at a little school in Western Crete, actually. How was it for me? I felt like I have received so many gifts from these stories. It is the least I can do to make a trip there and really attempt to connect and respect the place they come from. Because as you both know, stories are in books, but they're also in the land and they're in people and in songs and all that. Once I had those opportunities to travel there, I really wanted to make use of them and to try to connect with the place and the culture. And that was wonderful, just fantastic to be there. And I'd been to Greece before, a long time ago in 1989, but this was a longer visit. I had lots of different emotions. On the one hand, you feel like someone using a map that is thousands of years out of date because you're like, oh, yeah, I know Greece, Mycenae, that's where Agamemnon's from. But obviously, Greece is a modern country, and and your map is very old. So I expected that, and that's what happened, of course. But also, there's these flashes where the stories live in the culture as they do, as other stories live in other places in the world. And that was marvelous to see. It was wonderful to go to a place like Mycenae, to go to Delphi, to go to Ithaki, and to just get, if nothing else, the nature, because it helps you visualize. To go to the beach on Ithaki and see that there's pine needles and little pink flowers, that's great. Or the color of the water and the rocks. And then now and then, really uncanny glimpses would happen of the ancient stories. I was in Crete and had told stories at a school, and I was in the taverna in this very small town one night, and the school teacher came in, and she spoke to everyone else in the taverna, local people who lived in that village, in Greek, and she said, "This is Jay. He told stories in the school to the children. And look at this, everyone. My name is now known even as far away as New York." She'd met me, and so her name was known as far away. So that was kind of fun. But right away, I thought of the Odyssey, in which Odysseus wakes up on the shore of Ithaki, and he doesn't know where he is, and he suspects he is, in fact, not at home and not on the island of Ithaki. And a teenage boy comes up who is Athena in disguise. And he asks the teenage boy, "What island is this?" And the boy says, "You mean you don't know where you are? Well, that's a problem. Some say you don't even know who you are if you don't know where you are. But you're on a small island, which is not very good for horses, but good for sheep and goats. And it has many grapes grow well here and olives. And the name of this island has traveled far, even as far away as Troy. And this island is Ithaca." So who knows? Maybe it was just coincidence. But this woman in this village in Western Crete and Homer, whoever that is, used the same expression, which was, "My name is known as far as blah, blah, blah," which is not something I've ever heard an American say. I've never met an American who would meet you and, "Oh, now my name is known as far as LA," because you're from LA. So little glimpses like that were fascinating. I mainly went to pay my respects and to try to learn and to listen more than to tell, to learn and to listen. And I was lucky to have the chance to do that.
Yeah, I can
And
imagine.
have you tried this fad with the personal tales? Have you given it a try yourself?
I haven't. The closest thing I do is I often tell stories, and if it's a more intimate group, if it's a class or perhaps online, I invite people to connect with the story in any way they can. And so often stories will come out of like, oh, the when so and so's lost in the woods, it reminds me of whatever the time I got divorced or the horrible job I had or something. I do the same, and on my podcast, sometimes I share personal stories that help me to connect because, how we live and the stories we tell are related, sometimes in mysterious and magical ways. The Odyssey makes more sense to me because of some time in my 30s when I was just kind of floating around and not sure what I was doing and where I was going, for example. Sleeping Beauty makes more sense to me now that I'm a father with a daughter. Proteus makes more sense to me as I get older and I see how in one life you can become many different things. But I have never advertised myself as a personal storyteller. I don't know, I'm just not as interested in that, perhaps. It's a great way to connect with other people. Nowadays, we feel very isolated, I think, in the modern world. And so telling personal stories is a wonderful way to share. But it's sort of like they're dots on a graph, and a myth is like the whole curve. A myth is a pattern which applies to many lives, whereas a personal story is a
Mm.
particular pattern, an example of how it affected you. So it's beautiful, and I admire those folks, but I'm just not as driven to do that.
I see, I see. That was a nice picture with the dot and the curve. However, I think people use personal stories not only to connect with others, not only as a exposure of your vulnerability, but also because it's a sort of psychotherapy, isn't it? I mean, you unburden yourself just by the process of putting what happened. It could be some trauma or whatever, some difficult situation you went through. If you put your thought together and then put it down in words and then allow those words to come out of your mouth and your mind and your heart. It is a process of unburdening, unwinding. I don't know. I think it works like that for many, many people. It's not just connecting. That too, of course. And then
Mm,
again, there are some personal stories who really deserve to be told. I mean, I've heard
mm,
some that were really touching in Butterfly and Moth, for
mm,
example.
mm. Absolutely. Yeah, well, story's healing in every. I agree. Yeah, I think you're right. It is healing to share your story, to share your narrative. And of course, it's healing to connect your story to a traditional story as well. Like if you're a veteran coming home from a war, suddenly the Odyssey is a different story to you. If you're telling Jack and the Beanstalk with Jack and his mother and there's no father, I've told that in schools and children really notice. They're like, wow, there's no dad. Particularly if perhaps it's a child without a father in some way. They will notice that. And of course, the masculine energy comes in that story as a giant, an aggressive masculine giant. So, yeah, I would certainly agree that it's therapeutic. And also, I would add that all story has a healing potential, certainly, when heard in the right way.
You mentioned your podcast. Would you like to tell our listeners a little bit about that?
Sure. I've got a podcast called the Crane Bag Podcast. It's named for a magical bag made from the skin of a crane by Finn McCool, the Irish hero. I tell stories on that podcast. It's over 160 episodes now. And I also interview folks as well. So the Odyssey, the Iliad, the Mahabharata is there, fairy tales, many different stories that I've told over the years. And you can find that online at the Crane Bag Podcast. It's an opportunity for me to get it exactly right. So I prefer a live audience, but it is also nice to get them down in that way. So
Well, when we publish the episode, we're going to put the link underneath in any case so that people can find it more easily.
thank you.
Sure. Simona, do you think it might be time for our second tale?
I was just about to ask for a second story.
Okay. All right. A story. Well, here's a story, and may this story come to us. Stories are like rivers. They're like strange birds. They are like wild winds that flow through our lives. And we can only hope to be empty enough to listen to them. And may our attention feed and nourish this story. Once there was a wise woman who lived in the heart of a forest, and her name was Ceridwen. And she had many magical abilities. That's what people said. People said, oh, who's that lady there? Oh, she does certain things. There were rumors, there were stories about her. Some people said she could speak to stones. Others said she heard the voices of the earthworms in the ground. Some said she could speak to the clouds and hear the willow tree grumbling in the dirt, trying to find its way as its roots tried to find their way around a stone. So there were many stories about her and her magical abilities. But though she was known to be magical and powerful, she had a son who many thought was ugly and ill-favored. Nothing will come from him, everybody said. No, no. She desired to change this, and she had high hopes for her son. So she decided to brew a potion of inspiration and knowledge in her cauldron. So she went into the forest, singing as she went, and by that song she found many plants that were hidden in secret beneath rocks and in shadows. And she found certain rocks and stones, and she took them back to her cauldron, and she ground them up and put them inside, and the scales of certain fish and the feathers of birds, and water from 7 different rivers. She took all these things and she placed them in her cauldron. And then she told a blind man named Morda to stoke the fire beneath this cauldron. And she needed someone to stir the potion. So she took hold of a boy who lived nearby. Gwienbach was his name. And she said, you must stir this cauldron. He had other things he wanted to do, but she looked at him the way a hawk looks at a mouse, and he knew it was dangerous to refuse her. So he said, all right, how long do you want me to stir it for? Not long, she said, just a year and a day. A year and a day. So he took hold of a great wooden spoon, and he began to stir that cauldron. And he stirred it all that summer as the birds sang in the trees. And he stirred that cauldron all through the autumn as the leaves turned the colors of fire and fell to the ground. And his shoulders ached as he stirred that cauldron all through the winter, as the snow fell out of the clouds and a cold wind blew. And he stirred that cauldron all through the next spring, as the bees buzzed amid the flowers. And he stirred that cauldron into the next summer, as once again the bees buzzed and the birds sang and the sun poured down like honey out of the sky. And it was almost the day when that spell would be finished. For time was an element in the potion as well. A year had passed, and the next day would be the day when the potion would be at its most powerful. But on that day, suddenly, 3 drops of that potion sputtered out of the cauldron and landed on his finger. Ow! It hurt, it burned, so he put his finger into his mouth to ease the pain. And as he did so, his body was flooded with knowledge and inspiration, like golden light flowing through his bones. And he listened, and he could hear things he hadn't heard before. He heard stones in the ground complaining to each other about the acidity of the dirt. He's heard the wind talking to the leaves of the tree, telling its stories, and went all the way back to the beginning of time. He heard the wind talking and the birds and the bees, and he looked and he saw stars in the daytime sky shining in the blue light. Amazing. He heard many different voices. The world was a buzz and a hum with wild voices. But his heart told him to look in a certain direction. And he looked, and there was Ceridwen in a field, gathering plants for another potion. And as he looked at her, she was quite far away, but she looked up at him. And she snarled, and she began to run through the forest. So he turned himself into a rabbit, and he scampered away. Well, she ran towards him, but he was fast. Soon she came to the place where the cauldron was, but as she approached, the cauldron shattered into 1,000 pieces. And smoke rose, for now that potion was a poison which would kill anyone who drank from it. And off she went into the trees. Well, he ran, but soon she was right behind him. She was a greyhound now, pouring herself after him, about to devour him with her claws. So he went this way and that, and he came to a river. And he leapt off the bank of that river, and he landed in those waters as a fish. And she came to the bank of that river, and she leapt as a greyhound into the air, but when she hit that water, she was an otter. And with a great beat of her tail, she went swimming after him through the river. And she was about to catch him, about to devour him with her claws, so he leapt out of the river and became a sparrow. And she thundered after him as a hawk. Higher and higher she rose, her claws extended, about to take hold of him with her talons. He looked around this way and that. He looked down at the ground. There was the river. There was the forest. There was a barn, and its door was open. So he clasped his wings around him, and he fell out of the sky. And he went through the door of that barn, and he landed on the floor of that barn. And the barn was covered in grains of wheat. So he turned himself into a grain of wheat, and he hid on the floor, crouching. And Ceridwen came out of the sky as a great hawk, and she went into that barn and landed on the ground. And she looked, and she saw the grains of wheat. And so she turned herself into a chicken, and she began to eat all of the grain on the floor. She pecked them up, and he was there, crouched inside himself, hearing the sound of his brothers and sisters of the grain being devoured by this chicken. And then suddenly she took hold of him, and she swallowed him, and he was gone. Well, then she remembered herself. She remembered her woman's heart and her knees and her flashing eyes and her long, beautiful hair. She became herself, and she walked out of that barn and across a field and back into the forest that was her home. But when she arrived there, she realized something. She was pregnant. And 9 months later, she gave birth to a beautiful baby boy. He was lovely and charming, but he had also stolen that potion which was supposed to go to her son. Gah! She wanted to kill him then and there, to slit his throat, but he was so cuddly and beautiful and lovely. Ah, sweet little baby boy. But she wanted to kill him. Gah, kill him. Ah, sweet baby boy. Gah! This went back and forth for some time. After 3 days, she made a decision, and she bound him to her breast, and she walked through the forest and to the ocean. And she got to the ocean, and she sat down on the shore, and she nursed him one last time. And then she slipped her baby boy into a leather bag, and she sewed the bag up, and she placed it on the waters of the sea. And then she turned, and she walked away, back into the forest, without turning back. Well, that bag did not sink. It floated on the waves. And some say it was carried for 3 hours. Some say 3 days, 3 weeks, or 3 years. But all agree that the baby in that bag was cared for by the sea, as any child would wish to be cared for by its mother. And as he floated on the sea, the rhythms of the ocean and the tides and the music of the stars entered his body. He was schooled by those patterns, by that darkness, and by the daily rising of the sun. And all that he was changed. And after some time, the ocean washed that bag up onto a shore. It was the pre-dawn hours. The sun had yet to arise, and there was a net there strung between two poles, and the bag was caught in this net. And in the early morning light, fishermen came walking down the shore. One of them was named Elfin. He'd had bad luck lately. He'd caught nothing with his net. And he looked again, and his friends looked, and they looked at his net. Ah, look at this. You've caught garbage, it looks like. There's garbage in your net, that's all. And he said, no, it might be something beautiful. Let's see. So he walked to that net, and with his arms he took that bag out of the net and put it on the sand. As he did so, it joggled and moved. Something was inside it, something alive. And then he took his knife, and he sliced open that bag. And then, as the sun crested the edge of the world, two wet hands reached up out of that bag and opened it, and a boy stepped shining out of this bag in the light of the morning sun. And he looked at Elfin, and he said, "My name is Taliesin, the bard with the shining brow. There is magic in my tongue, and it is to your great and good fortune that you have found me here." And he took Elfin's hand in his own. And then the two of them walked up the beach away from the sea, which crashed and murmured and wailed behind them. And then Taliesin, the bard, began to sing a song. Thank you for listening to that story.
Wonderful. I love the connection to the story of birth of Athena and swallowing and changing. It was wonderful. And where does this story come from?
That's a Welsh story. It is often connected with the Mabinogion or the Mabinogi, although strictly speaking, it's not completely a part of that story cycle. But in books, it's frequently thrown in there. So I love it, and the transformation's quite interesting. In both cases, people sort of make plans that go wrong or change.
And then there's the
Yeah.
birth
What's that?
in both stories. There's the birth.
Yeah, yeah,
Lovely.
yeah,
Very well connected, the two. Thank
yeah.
you, Jay. That was
Yeah.
lovely. When you were playing the drum, I
Mhm.
loved the sound of the ocean, the thing you did with your fingers there while the boy was traveling. There were some letters written on top. What's it saying, your drum?
I have runes on the drum, Nordic runes. At a certain point, I was just inspired to decorate the drum one day. And I heard that the Sami people, the indigenous people of the far north, they decorate their drums and often use them for divination. So I'm told. They'll put an object on the drum and will sing a song, and where the object lands, where it ends up on the drum, that will assist them in choosing what story to tell. So perhaps to heal someone, do that, and it would tell you what story is needed in that particular moment. So it remains my aspiration to use the drum in that way because we have to ask ourselves, why do we tell the stories we tell? And it's easy to say, oh, I like it. That's why. But that's a very modern answer. I like it. It puts all the agency with us. And in fact, there's very complicated reasons why we might tell a particular story. Simple ones like, I heard the Odyssey as a kid, for example, and more complicated ones like maybe the story wanted to be told. Maybe it has a way of deciding and offering itself to you. That's a mysterious process. And so I put runes on the drum with some wonderful ink my wife gave me made from oak trees. And I hope someday to use it in that way to help me choose what story to tell.
I still have two stories I tell. I don't know why I tell them. There are still two that are in the process of working themselves. I don't know.
And you say you don't know why you tell them.
Absolutely not. No idea.
Do you want to find out or don't you mind?
Well, I know it will appear at some point. It will come to me eventually. I'm not pushing the process. I enjoy telling them. I just don't understand why I do.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah,
Yeah.
no, because I like it is not sufficient, obviously.
Right. Sometimes I think it's because we need to be healed by whatever's in the story, and there's something there for us. But that's not always, perhaps. But
Ooh, food for thought.
Yeah.
mm.
This has been a lovely interview, an hour well spent. Thank you very much for being here and doing this with us. And we wish you success with your endeavors and your podcast.
Likewise, may we all have chances to tell stories soon. Thank you so much for having me as your guest, and it's been a pleasure to talk with you both.
Our muse, you've been our
Thank you.
muse. We
Ah,
have muses here, not guests, you see.
I'm
Yeah,
honored.
You
because
give us
we
inspiration.
exactly, Simone. We draw inspiration from our guests, so they're our
Mm.
muses. Have a
Thank you so
great
much.
day.
You too. Thank you so much. Yes.